So this is the concluding panel of this astonishing and very thought-enriching conference. And the title of the panel is Future Perspectives for Cohabitation on the Earth. My name's Sarah Kay. I'm the director of the Center for French Language and Cultures here at NYU and the chair of the Department of French. And it's my pleasure to introduce our three last speakers, who, as in I think has been typical of many of these panels, are from different disciplines and work in different institutional environments. In Anne Simon, we have a specialist of French. In Bénédicte Ramade, an art historian. And in Stéphanie Posthumus, a specialist in comparative literature. So it's a great pleasure to stage once again interactions between speakers who come from different knowledge bases, but who come to interact on the themes of this conference. I'll introduce all three speakers and in turn, and because there are three speakers in this panel, unlike many where there have been only two, the papers will try to keep to 25 minutes, so that there will be a good time for discussion at the end. So, start then with Anne Simon. It's a great pleasure to introduce Anne Simon. Anne Simon's bio represents one of those obligatory tours of all of the great landmarks of French education. Graduate of the EHESS, agrégé, habileté. Oh, I missed out the doctorate from the Sorbonne. Anne has had a very impressive career and has generously shared her knowledge with international collaborators, I think, through all of it. I met you the first time at a conference on Proust at Princeton, and at that time you were collaborating with my colleague André Benaïm on animal littérature. Your current big collaborative venture is in the context of the EHESS and the CNRS in the Centre de Recherche sur les Arts et le Langage. And as a result of this constantly dialogic movement in your career, your work moves between history, politics, literature, and asks how we can investigate the relationship between thought, the sensible, and literary creation. The work for which you're currently best known is your work on Zoopoetics, and you have a book coming out soon on Proust.
No, in fact, the book on Proust was just published.
It was just
this
published.
Summer, but the book on Zoopoetics is a bit delayed.
Anyway, and for anyone who works in the field of 20th, 21st century French literature, Anne Simon is a household name, and so I will not continue any longer, but hand her the floor.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for your welcoming invitation here at the Maison Française, and of course to Frédéric and Philippe for this conference. And so I will speak about Zoopoetics, which aim to highlight the plurality of stylistic, linguistic, and narrative means or media used by writers to express the plurality of animal activities, actions, feelings, and words. And I prefer perhaps to use these words than behaviors or affects, because it has a political sense. But Zoopoetics goes further, as it considers as impossible to restrain the focus just on animals, even with the S at the end of animals or beasts, as Derrida or Elisabeth de Fontenay advocated. Zoopoetics underlines the intricacy of the interactions between humans, other animals, plants, wind, minerals, and much more. We will see that zoopoetics, and I insist on poetics, opens anew the question of coevolution between natural forms and human languages, and that it tries to deconstruct the Western category of natural kingdoms, just showing that all so-called kingdoms are always crossing each other. It doesn't mean that there are no species. It means, and I agree with Emanuele, that life is a contamination and a metabolization of different species, that life is always living through. Such an approach is based on a renewal of disciplinary interfaces. If the dialogue with philosophy, ethics, or history need to continue, I see it necessary to tackle more unusual overlaps, such as between literary studies and legal studies, anthropological perspectivism, religious studies, those semiotics or ethology. The issue is obviously not for one to become an expert in all of these disciplines, of course, but to understand what they discuss when they place animals at the core of their investigations. In other words, what outside literary studies operates as a stake, a cut, a blind spot, or a driving force. Finding out what's at stake in another field allows one to shift focus, shake up one's routine, and reshape the approach of one's own field of research. It also enables one to reveal the potential inputs of literary studies in the animal question and broader in the question of life. Focusing on other ways of thinking is very fruitful, as it leads one to question anew the narrative and syntactic structures, the rotations of rhythms and points of view, the thematic innovations that a writer brings into play when writing about animality or animals, not exactly the same, even laboriously. Indeed, writers' ways of writing enable them to engage their reader in the world of a specific animal, while admitted the extent to which this world eludes them, and it is not for me a contradiction. In both cases, the relationship between literary creation and the life of an animal seems to be built on a paradox. Certainly, nothing is more specifically human than a creative language based on imagination, e.g., literature, which Merleau-Ponty considered as a langage à la seconde puissance, language to the second power, perhaps. It seems to be, literature seems to be the pinnacle of language, and in some way of man from a temporary logocentric perspective. More than the most astonishing abstract demonstration, its poetic and fictional application brings the language to its higher degree of figurality, polysemy, and complexity. The novel can be viewed as the ideal genre which connects the art of time and the exploration of spaces, growing rich through bifurcations, red herrings, and detours. The scattered great fugue of animals, brought by Jean-Christophe Bailly, enlightens us on the many life forms. Many writers are guided by this fugue into quirky ways to enter linguistic forms and narrative composition. Such profusion and dissemination of the novel's discourse, of which Moby Dick, in my view, is a paradigmatic case, can in turn portray animals as voiceless beings, for which and in place of which writers must speak. It's Deleuze. Writers, but also philosophers, who consider themselves as distraught animals on the lookout. Les philosophes qui se disent des êtres aux aguets, in l'abécédaire de Deleuze. But the very possibility of such assignment shows that animals aren't actually mere alloga. They continue carrying out communication strategies, passing on their patterns from generation to generation, or like potential novelists, telling stories. Animals tell stories to us from the beginning. They are, for instance, capable of deceiving their equals or humans, as in the case of the old day-fooling, blundering hunters in Maurice Genevoix's The Last Herd. It is a known fact that shared spaces of meaning always turn up among such mixed communities, as highlighted by Anne Innes, Marie Midgley, Vincent Desprez, Anne Jonas, and so on, and it shouldn't come as a surprise. Indeed, according to many linguists and philosophers, parts of human languages originated in animal forms, such as those related to body parts or types of locomotion or noise emissions. Just think of onomatopoeia and the many other words whose meaning is conveyed by their sounding, such as the hiss of the snake or the serpent. And I'm hinting both at Paul Shepard and Bernie Krause. Or if we look into scripts, with for example, David Abraham in The Spell of the Census, take Egyptian and Aegean ideograms, or the Hebrew consonant gimel, which means camel and reminds us of a camel's head and front legs. Furthermore, animals are more figurative or rhetorical than is usually thought. Their relationship to the world, even guided by instinct, doesn't conflict with expression nor with invention. Agency is constitutive of their existence from the most basic organisms on, and I sing to Merleau-Ponty again. The ability to act upon the environment and to respond in a more adapted, if not more innovative way to its unsteady and undetermined nature isn't limited to humans. Supporting his assumption with the studies of ethologists, linguists, and philosophers, Aaron Moe, in his book Zoopoetics, has recalled how animals can create bodily forms of responses to the request of others and of the world, such through sound, gestures, behaviors, rhythms, and so forth. No wonder that Derrida, the first philosopher who coined the notion of zoopoetics in L'animal que donc je suis, used it to refer to Kafka, whose diary and many short stories were dedicated to the psychic and political fluxing of the human-animal line. The problem of animality in the novel compels us to reopen the question of the ontological and exotic power of literature as explored by Victor Segalen. If the novel cannot be reduced to the projection of a phantasmagorical world or to a solipsistic experience of reality, if the novel doesn't settle for the exhibition of sheer linguistic structures, it is because the language whose articulations the novel displays is not an ex nihilo ability or a specificity which would oppose us to animality. Just like dance, which is another paradoxical art, in the sense that the human body escapes itself in the most extreme self-proximity, the literary experience doesn't antagonize the sensible experience. We don't have, I never know how to translate sensible as used by Merleau-Ponty. They resect from each other, language and experience. The question of anthropomorphism, often deemed a fault or an aporia, should therefore be revoked. Human beings, supposedly only anthropocentric, may not escape their human skins, and their language taints with humanity everything it touches. That's a very strange thesis, as if human language was only capable of speaking about mankind or couldn't speak of something other than human language. Aren't we denying the cognitive efficiency and profit of anthropomorphism, insofar as not all anthropomorphisms are alike? I am hinting at the distinction proposed by Baptiste Morisot between a spontaneous anthropomorphism leading to false interpretation and a heuristic anthropomorphism which cares for analogies answering scientific protocols in the diplomat. Furthermore, the aforementioned benefits of studies on the prehistoric coevolution of human languages and animal sounds or sign patterns shouldn't be overlooked. Finally, there is a risk of forgetting that a human is not sheerly anthropomorphic, but also primatomorphic, mammomorphic, and more broadly, biomorphic, and you can see at Brian Keeley or to Baptiste too. When I say that that a human is not only or surely a human, I want to say that a human being is always more than we usually think when we say humanity. We are constituted of minerals like teeth or bones. We live because we are in symbiosis with microbes, viruses, bacteria, and because we eat and we metabolize other living beings. And Emanuele, I think, would agree. So, human language is intertwined with everything human is or is more than he is. Many novelists understood this without spelling it out. Evolution and biomorphistic logics are such that we intuitively understand other species related to us. It's always a very big mystery for me when philosophers say that we can't understand other species. I mean, our first intuition is that if a dog is not very nice with us, we understand that he's threatening us or the contrary. So, we understand other species, we share, according to Darwin, their emotions and expressions, and we are able to account for this with specific human means and not despite specific human means, such as figurative language. My thesis is language is not an obstacle. Je sais pas si on dit un obstacle. Is not. Voilà, is not an impediment to communicate or to express other species. At the contrary. Mikhail Bakhtin generally defines the genre of the novel as the art of polyphony. If the novel can account for animal words and feelings, this is precisely because it allows language to fulfill it in an incredibly diversity of viewpoints. Such points of view are themselves partly grounded on the faculty of empathy and on its keen faculty of narratorial projection. The conscious mental simulation of the other's perspective as Deceptive Rights could turn out to be consubstantial with novel creation. Genevois' statement, 20 years after he wrote The Last Herd, that I've been the red there, and you think to Flaubert, of course, j'ai été Madame Bovary, ou je suis Madame Bovary. Donc, j'ai été le cerf rouge, I have been the red there, should be taken seriously. The prefix of the word empathy doesn't highlight an unbreakable confinement in a monadic human inside. It suggests that a community of affects and sensitivities could actually lead toward another inside and bring an encounter. I swear I wrote it before watching it at Bruno Latour's lecture yesterday, but I'm happy to for this crossing. So we don't need to be inside the bat. You remember this article. We don't need to be inside the dog. We just need to encounter, voilà, to go in the direction of other species. One may recall Derrida's beautiful pages on how beasts were long denied the ability to answer. Such paradoxical emotion allows for the coming out of oneself within the most intimate and trying experience of empathy. And I try to go out, or to the opposition between inside and outside, in fact, with this notion of empathy. Far from being a solipsistic illusion, it turns out to be mainly interrelational, entitling the mankind-animality intertwining broached by Merleau-Ponty in his lecture on nature. On the contrary, from Proust to Jean Rollin, Jacques Lacarrière or Marie Dariussec, some writers attempt to account for the alterity of animal worlds and observe henceforth a distance deemed an unbridgeable gap. It is always in order to express its fascinating eeriness or to move within another body devoid of a human brain. External focalization is then favored, as it allows one to stay close to animal bodies and motions, which at times appear almost brutal in its cold and impassionate rejection of sympathizing with beasts, with the familial animal detested by Sartre or Deleuze. So, you know, to express other species, we don't need to be empathic with other species. Even being really totally in a total alterity is a good way to express animality. And Proust is, for example, would be a good example. Applying the technique of multiple points of view to depict animal subjectivities should not be viewed as a sheer linguistics. First, when choosing any technique, any literary technique, a writer takes sides when considering animal interiority. It's a political choice, in fact. Secondly, literary language shouldn't be denied its almost magical, conjuring ability to refer to what falls beyond it. By conjuring, I mean evocation in its incantatory and invocatory meanings. According to the wonderful Dictionnaire historique de la langue française by Alain Ray, I went to evocation. What does it mean? To call on, to attract, to make appear by incantations, to resurrect spirits, to invoke shadows, to bring to mind by images, associations of ideas. And you see that I am very close to what Frédéric Haïtouati told this morning about the power of theater. It is necessary to break away from the mimetic when considering the notion of reference. A metaphor is quick and sharp, is lively in Paul Ricoeur's word, and it only speaks of a vivid world, of a nurturing nature, if poetic language is considered. 4 minutes? Okay. D'accord. If poetic language is considered a referential target, c'est la visée référentielle, hein, in The Rule of Metaphor by Paul Ricoeur. Poetic language is a force of enunciation, not an impossible copy-paste of its referent. We can reach animals because we don't have to be collé à l'animal, to be stick to animals. As Paul Ricoeur reminds us, the Greek man is less inclined than we are to identify the physis with an inert given. Since for him nature itself is alive, this may be why mimesis can avoid subjugation, and how it may be possible to mime nature through composition and creation. The attempts of literary perspectivism to make us enter the animal environment are not, I must insist, doomed to fail from the start. To render the complexity of such perspectivism implies accounting for two topoi at last, probably the most ancient ones regarding the relationship between animals and language, metamorphosis and hybridity, both universal mythological patterns. They deserve further development. I would only like to stress regarding our modernity and our French modernity, but not only, that it always concerns metaphors that are reflecting, in other words, never terminated or set. Contemporary writers believe in mold, in a more or less natural, fluid, political and metaphysical shifting from one specimen to the other. Franz Kafka's Human Ape in a report to an academy, the butchered bull in the industrial abattoirs in Alfred Döblin Berlin's Alexanderplatz, the half-crutch beetle in Clarice Lispector's The Passion According to G.H. are all animals abused by humans, but they share a common destiny and foreshadow Antoine Volodin's post-exotic characters. Indeed, these characters evolve in a concentrationary world where the runaways, the dying, the inmates, and the insects all struggle to survive or to destroy each other until they can hardly be differentiated. I quote Antoine Volodin in the book I prefer, Don Dog. Camps are for cockroaches and the dead. For us, then, as Gabriela Bruna said. Another quote. Finally, the bestial night could be heard, with the cracking of growing darkness, beasts nibbling at the end of the corridor, and very close, cockroaches mounting or terminating each other. For its part, the narrator of the beautiful Land Under Bac, Le Pays sous l'écorce, by Jacques Lacarrière, fails to wholly transform. He nevertheless succeeds in living, which is something, his hominid skin. Along social and not genetic and Darwinian logics, Marcel Proust's Bugman wavers between the aristocrat and the vibratil larva. Marie Dariussec's Sow Woman wavers between the whore and the sow. Émile Ajar Romain-Gary's Snake Man in Gros Câlin wavers between the desperate lone man of the city and the python that is the quintessential animal emblem of dodging and rebirth. The appeal of hybridation generated an animal fiction akin to what is called in philosophy an anthropological fiction. A fiction telling lies, for example, managing to place oneself in the existential gate of an animal. So a fiction to telling lies, to get at the truth. A fiction compelling both its writers and reader to displace their own access to the world, to change their groundings, their fears, and their joys. And I think to the delogement in George Steiner's extraterritorialities. I can end here, or I can speak 2 minutes more, as perhaps.
If you would just forgive us, I think it would be best if we moved on, because
yes.
we are out of time.
I just wanted to conclude about livestock farming and the industrialization of the living in contemporary writers and works, but voilà, I said it.
Thank you.